Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Outstanding Talks at Google event. Today, for our Food at Google program, we're very thrilled to welcome back Jody Eddy and Gunnar Karl Gíslason. So they will be speaking to us today about their latest cookbook, which is called North, the New Nordic Cuisine of Iceland. And some of us in the audience, I know myself personally, have traveled in the beautiful country, seen the food that was there, the fish and everything. And really what the book does is not only talk about Gunnar's restaurant, which is Dill, and very well known, one of the top Nordic restaurants in Iceland, and a continuation of the new Nordic cuisine tradition from René Redzepi. But the book also goes into background about the various producers throughout the country. So from the folks that provide the salt to the goat's milk to the people that are harvesting bird eggs off the coast of Iceland. There's a story for each one involved. And so we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So I encourage you to check the book out. We are sampling some Icelandic cuisine as well. Hop on down to the beautiful country if you get a chance. And please join me in welcoming Gunnar and Jody to Google.
So thank you so much for coming today. And I thought I would just start out by talking a little bit about my history with Gunnar and where we met. And I think I met him maybe 5 years ago. It was right when the economic collapse of Iceland's economy had just happened. And I was an editor at a culinary magazine. And I was most excited to meet with Gunnar, all the chefs I met in Iceland. And when I got there to the restaurant, they said that he wasn't there, and I was really disappointed. I had to leave the next day, but then he walked into Dill carrying a basket of angelica that he had just been collecting outside, and so he had been there. And we've just stayed in touch throughout the years, and then a variety of projects together. And he was in my last book on restaurant staff meals, and when we finished that up, I didn't really have a project in the works with him, and we had a conversation that night at the photo shoot and talked about how we should do something together profiling the traditional food producers of Iceland, because they're so important to Gunnar. And can you talk a little bit about why they mean so much to you?
Well, I think it's when I first opened up Dill restaurant, it is 5.5 years ago. It started up as being like, it was supposed to be a Nordic restaurant. I wanted to try to collect ingredients from all around the Nordic countries. The collapse came, and pretty much everything that I was gonna import was like going up in prices like crazy. So we somehow just started like going another way. We started with the usual suspects, and then went from there, trying to find something more, trying to find something new. In my case, maybe trying to find something old, actually. And very quickly, I found this like passion for finding those producers that are making their things the old way. And so I was trying to find them, and even harder was to find out how I could take those ingredients and make something like new out of it, something new that would be like that would fit perfectly into a fine dining restaurant. And it was for some things it was really easy and came very natural. For other things it was like months of headache. Mm-hmm. But
why was that? Why was it a challenge?
I mean, to take a winter-dried bullfish and make something really enjoyable out of it. Not that I'm saying it's bad, like it is, but it's more like you will have to do something with it so it fits the restaurant. We can't usually we just eat it like at home. We just tear it down, cover it with butter, and eat it like that. But obviously, I had to do something a little bit more interesting so I could serve it at the restaurant. And especially the dried fish actually was like it was kind of a headache.
Yeah.
But now I have like a couple of things that I like doing with it. So.
Hardfisker, what he's referencing, it's a dried wolf fish. It's dried in drying houses on the ocean, and it's certainly a tradition that is disappearing in Iceland, and I think that's what is that's what inspires me most about Gunnar, is that he is taking these traditional ingredients that even maybe Icelanders aren't appreciating anymore, and he's transforming them into something beautiful and contemporary, but still paying homage to the past. And his connections to his producers, I've so often seen that he's really keeping the tradition alive in some cases, and in some cases actually transforming a tradition, and also just making Icelanders appreciate what they have.
Excellent. I was like, when I started researching those things and finding all those people, at the same time I was finding out that they were like really slowly like fading away. And all the companies, they were coming up with both easier and cheaper and most of all faster ways to do their things. Like, for an example, with the dried fish, it's mostly dried out in some kind of ovens.
Yeah.
I mean, which is fine. It's like there's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's just not the same as the other one. The other one obviously is like really packed of flavors from the sea after hanging there. So the thing is that you have to find a place for your house, and you should find the place where it's as windy as it can be, pretty much. And then it's only dried during the winter time because the temperature has to be below zero. And it takes 1 month up to 2 months, depending on everything. And obviously, like, the fish will be really packed with flavors. And there are many other like examples. For an example, with the salted cod, that is like back in the days, it takes almost like up to a year to make it. But nowadays it's more starting to be new ways, injecting salt water and etc. etc. But still, we are so lucky to have a couple that are still doing it the old way. And obviously, we buy theirs.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit, because I think there's maybe a bit of misconception about what new Nordic cuisine is all about and what Nordic cuisine, contemporary Nordic cuisine is about. And maybe talk a little bit about what the manifesto for the new Nordic kitchen was and
Yeah, well, it's like... I don't know, it's actually quite a long time ago since the manifesto was made. It was actually a couple of chefs from the Nordic countries that actually all got together and made this little manifesto of things that should be something that would embrace our countries. The whole idea, and the first idea, I guess, was to try to make a kitchen that could be well known, like worldwide. And I guess people like... They saw that it could be a problem to make like one country, to make like a Norwegian kitchen or Danish kitchen for that matter, and make it like really big, so it could get like known worldwide, like the Italian kitchen or the French kitchen or etc. So they decided somehow that, and I think that was one of the reasons that it would be good to like take them all together, somehow like trying to take the Nordic countries and everybody. Like work together and try to embrace each other and that we could get that Nordic kitchen like on the map, and it happened so fast and so big that I think nobody believed it, and now it's I don't know, it's like somehow maybe those words like the Nordic kitchen is. For me, at least, some people use it to describe a certain type of food. But for me, it's more like a Nordic kitchen would be like a restaurant that are like using those ingredients that are about close to them. But they could be like really different when it comes to how to make the food or how to plate it or serve it for that matter. So it's like, for me, it's like a very big umbrella for a lot of things, for a lot of kitchens, techniques, and etc.
And I think one of the things that we really talk a lot about in our cookbook is that you can take these techniques or you can take this philosophy and really apply it anywhere in the world and incorporate it. And just, they talk so much about a sense of place in Nordic countries and associated with the term New Nordic. And it really does mean that, look outside. If there's something in the cookbook that you can't source, just find out what's in your own backyard and use that. And I think that's really the philosophy of what Nordic cuisine is about, as opposed to specific techniques or ingredients.
You just go into your backyard and find whatever you have and use it.
Can you talk a little bit more about...
Just make sure not to eat something poison.
Yeah, exactly. Can you talk a little bit more about the techniques, like specific techniques in Iceland that are really unique to Iceland? Like cooking techniques, maybe your hay smoking and smoking with manure and...
Yeah, it's probably now you want to hear about the manure again. It's actually like that's one of the old traditions as well. Probably since the time of Vikings. It's something that was it was a technique that, like, so during the winter time the sheep would be inside the houses. They would do like number 1 and 2 on the floor and have some hay in between, and they walk on it the whole winter. So it's thick like this in the beginning of the summer. In the beginning of the summer, the sheep that just go up to the mountains and they live really freely there all summer. The farmers, on the other hand, they will go and cut it into layers, take it outside and dry. And it's like, I thought it was like really basic technique, but it's really kind of complicated to find the exact right dirt or manure to use, because it cannot be too dry, it cannot be too wet. If it's too dry, it will just like go up in flames. If it's too wet, it obviously won't burn. So it's a kind of complicated technique, and obviously it takes a long time, and obviously we have to have sheep. But it's like something that, I mean, they didn't start doing it because they really just loved their shit so much. But it's probably more because they didn't have anything else to burn. So there were like serious lack of trees in Iceland. And it actually went so far that at a certain time they started to try to protect those few trees that we had left. So obviously people had to find something else to dry and burn or smoke with or whatever. So this was one of the things that they came up with.
And I think that's certainly something, after traveling in Iceland for many years, that I see over and over again, is that, they often, it's a matter of survival, really. And so you really have to be clever and figure out how to use what you have. And, we'll talk a little bit later about the geothermal salt maker who makes salt using geothermal heat. The rye bread producer who uses, instead of wood, using geothermal heat from the ground and baking the bread in the ground. There's just so many different ingredients and techniques that I think really reflect that tradition of not having anything and just having to be clever.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. And can you just talk a little bit more about the geothermal energy and the heat? And I think that's a really, and also about how Iceland is such a pristine country. They've tried to market Iceland as one of the only 100% sustainable nations because of the fact that you don't have chemicals, the animals are free range, you don't use antibiotics, and
most of it at least. No, but it's we try to use that heat from the ground for some good things, definitely. But obviously it can sometimes be a little bit hard because I can't use it because I would have to drive pretty far away to find one. But on those areas where they have that geothermal heat, it is used quite a lot. I think we can use it even more. But for an example, we have that salt producer, and it's somehow it's like I really don't. It's only like a couple of years old, that company, and it's like now there are like 2 companies making like high-end salt in Iceland. But for me, it's just like really strange that we haven't been doing this like always, because it's so simple. The only thing they do is they pump some seawater up from the sea and up in some tanks, and they dry it over geothermal heat.
That's it.
That's
and
it.
it's the best finishing salt and salt that I've truly
It's
ever
really, really good.
eaten.
Really good. But the same with the heat, with obviously like on those places where there is a lot of heat in the ground, people will use it to cook with, to bake in the bread, for an example. And obviously we use it for our greenhouses. Mm-hmm. So it's like, greenhouses in general maybe quite often like looking down at, but I think it's like it could be something that we could be kind of proud of in Iceland, because of the heat from the ground that is being used and like how green our electricity is.
Mm-hmm. And I also here's a picture. What you're seeing there is whale, and so I thought we could talk a little bit about some of the products that they use in Iceland, because so often it's all they have, and I think it can be very controversial. But I also think it speaks to using what's around you, and if you can talk a little bit more about things maybe they would call taboo, horse meat and whale and.
Yeah, it's like definitely back in the days, people, they had to survive, and they were not gonna have some big issues about if it was a whale or something else. If they could cook it and eat it, they probably just did. Now it's like whale is not really many people in Iceland that are eating it. Not many at all. I'm actually pretty sure it's like most of the whale sold in Iceland is sold to tourists. But there are some more things like, for example, horses, which are eaten all year around, and it's actually, I actually had like issues like eating horse, but it's because like I came from the countryside and we raised horses, so it was a little bit like eating my dog. But then again, people do that as well.
Not in Iceland.
Not in Iceland. No. But then I decided like a couple of months ago that it's like, okay, let's go. So obviously I had ate some horses like back in the days, but it's really good if you find the right producer and you find the right horse. Actually, it's really, really nice.
Yeah. I think one of the questions I always get when people hear that I'm working on an Icelandic cookbook is, what is the shark like? And again, I think it's one of those kind of tired questions that, there are some notorious ingredients in Iceland that are very traditional and really, again, speak to that time when food was about survival. It was about getting through the winter and, using preservation techniques. They don't necessarily appeal to the modern palate, but I think it's important that these traditions continue because it's really the legacy of Iceland and the legacy of surviving and perseverance.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a good question about that shark, because it's something. I wouldn't go so far to say that I really dislike it, but it's not really pleasant at all. It smells like really, really strong. But actually, like after you start eating it, it smells more than it actually tastes. And a lot of people actually is like, I met like a lot of like foodies people that are like really into strong cheeses, and they actually just happen to enjoy this a lot. Because it's like the texture and everything is actually it is a lot like a strong cheese, and it's like it's like, even though I don't really like love eating it, it would be a big shame if it would die out. And the technique again is something that takes months. Yeah. And it would be a shame.
Yeah. And we did meet with it's a fermented or essentially putrefied shark. Yeah. And we met with it's called Karl, with a Karl producer. And, talking with him, he's in his, I think, 80s now, and there isn't anyone who is going to take over what he's doing. And so even if this ingredient isn't something that appeals to everyone, it's really sad that it might disappear when he disappears. You know, that I have a picture here of puffins, and that's another ingredient I think in Iceland that it's a part of Icelandic tradition, but not necessarily something that you would.
It's very like what do you call it? It's very like a local thing. So he's not just everywhere. But yeah, definitely like the Siggi and Grímsey, they will hunt a lot of it. Vestmannaeyjar and in the west. But now it's protected on a way. It's a thing you're allowed to go and hunt it, but you're not allowed to sell it, and you're not allowed to sell it on the restaurants. Yeah, but it's a very big tradition in Iceland to eat those. Not only those, but a lot of birds in their same family, and even at the time some of their eggs.
And here's a photo of somebody cooking eggs in geothermal water. And again, that's an old tradition that is not common anymore, but it is something, you know, from the past that I think is really fascinating and
definitely.
very uniquely Iceland.
Yeah.
And so I just thought we could talk a little bit about what Viking stock is. If you can address that and talk about why Iceland's animals are truly unique in the world.
No, so it's like Iceland has those rules somehow like to protect their species. So it's illegal to for an example, if you're going to take this horse to a show in Denmark, you're not allowed to take it back, and you're not allowed to import other types of horses, and this goes for like more or less every animal.
And these were animals that were introduced by the Vikings in the 9th century. So they are unique species on the planet because they have never bred with other species. And
exactly. And it's like, maybe you can speak about your goats.
We met a goat farmer in Iceland who had been a nurse in Reykjavík, and she quit her job maybe 8 years ago, because the Icelandic goat population had dipped to below 90 animals, and she realized that if she didn't do something, they might go extinct. And so the goat population now hovers around 900 animals in Iceland, and truly thanks to Johanna Thorvaldsdóttir, you know, I think because of her work, people are starting to appreciate the goats again and really see that it's important to not only protect the goats for the sake of the goats, but it's a legacy and it's history that they're protecting. But Johanna runs the only commercial goat farm in Iceland, and she has about 400 of the goats on her farm. And her farm was about to go into foreclosure actually next week. And so they were going to slaughter her goats, which would mean it would wipe out half the population. And so we started an Indiegogo campaign for her, me and a friend. And we've raised over $110,000 in about a month. And her farm will be saved now, and her goats will be saved. But I think the important thing about it is that it really speaks to the fact that the Icelandic people are starting to appreciate what they have. And she has said to me since this campaign started, her tours on the farm have increased exponentially because now there is an appreciation. And I think it speaks to what you're all about as well, that you have often used ingredients that weren't necessarily, they weren't used by Icelandic people, such as blue mussels. They have the most beautiful, pristine blue mussels in Iceland, but they weren't using them. And then when they show up on your table, they start to kind of show up on other restaurant tables, and then maybe they're bought by the consumer, and it's just interesting to watch it kind of trickle out. And
Definitely. And I mean, like a lot of other things, like for seaweed, for an example.
This is actually he's the seaweed and blue mussel harvester that Gunnar works with. Can you talk a little bit more about him and his work?
Yeah, so he is. His name is Simon. He lives in the west. He lives on Snæfellsnes. So he is. He has a small company. I think there are like 3 or something working there, so he grows blue mussels, and then he collects a couple types of seaweed, and sells to the local restaurants, and he is even exporting some of his seaweed as well. So it's doing great.
Absolutely. So we'll get to some of our producers here. So these are some of the herbs that they use in Iceland. What are some of those common herbs that you would find in your kitchen at Dill?
Well, it's I use probably most of angelica, maybe chervil. Those are probably the most common ones that I use a lot. Arctic thyme, obviously, really really delicious, especially when it's in bloom. But it's but then we take the trees. We go for birch trees, pine trees, and etc. And probably the best part about foraging in Iceland is there are pretty much nothing in the nature that will actually kill you if you taste it. So you can actually go. You can just go there, you just go and taste everything, and you don't really have to worry about it. So that's pretty good.
It's very fun. So Gunnar and I, these are just a few shots of Iceland itself, and we traveled. We probably ringed the country 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, probably.
We hit every corner of Iceland, and it is very fun to travel with him because you do eat everything, and you learn so much about what's around you. And I've found myself, when I travel in other countries, thinking about now what I could try that I'm seeing on the ground. And so these are just a few shots of just us on our road trip, Gunnar relaxing.
There is no place better to relax than on Icelandic moss.
It's really, I think, maybe challenging. Our photographer, his name is Evan Sung. He's talked about how it's challenging in Iceland because everything is beautiful, and every corner that you turn, it feels more beautiful than the last. And it's a good problem to have, but it can be overwhelming.
The thing as well is one of the first ideas about this book was because I really wanted to have it almost in 3 chapters. I wanted to try to talk a lot about our producers, and especially those that are doing their traditional stuff and maybe kind of fading out. And I really wanted to have a whole lot of landscape because that's somehow that's what inspires me mostly. And then of course the food. Mm-hmm. So it's a dream come true.
This is bacalhau, which is the salted cod. And can you talk a little bit about Elvar, our bacalhau producer in the book?
Yeah. So I've been buying bacalhau from Elvar for a lot of years, many years actually. He lives in a really really small village in the north part of Iceland called Hauganes. I think it's 70 people or something that lives there, and I think he said, I asked how many people then from the village actually worked for him, and I think he said all except 2 old ladies or something.
He sustains his entire village with his bacalhau factory.
He's a fantastic guy. He's a 3rd generation of salted cod maker. So what he has there is obviously very important and dear to him. He uses this old technique. So it takes up to a year to make it, to salt it, and then they put it in water actually after. And he makes 2 kinds. He makes this one, and then he makes one that is dried out in the sun as well. And you can only imagine how fun that is in Iceland. It's it rains constantly, so it's
it's a challenge.
Yeah, you have to jump out and dry and in. So it's a challenge. But but as well, it's like it's a lot of fun to go and visit him and talk to him and like it just like get all his like feelings that he has for his company, and it makes it so much more fun to actually use the product, and even to hear him say like we've been asking him if he's like pressing his kids because it's like
to take over.
To take over because they have to be the fourth.
He was telling me that he might skip his daughters, but that his grandchildren are very interested in. But I think Elvar really speaks to me about how if his work disappears, I think he is maybe the last, if not one of the last bacalhau producers in Iceland. And
I think there are probably three.
Yeah. And so he's a very jovial person, one of the funniest people I've ever met in Iceland or anywhere. But his work is important. It's really critical. And, there's was always that question in the book to each producer of, will somebody take over this work, do you think? And with him, there's optimism there because his grandkids do seem interested.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it's been interesting as well to meet with these producers throughout the years because with Elvar, he was really struggling after that economic collapse. And I visited him, I do some Iceland culinary tours, and I visited him maybe last month. And he's doing better. He's selling to companies throughout Europe. And so it's been really great to watch their evolution and to see that they're surviving and thriving in some cases. So this is the Arctic char that you actually tried today. Can you talk a little bit about him and his work?
Yeah. Those are the ones that are smoking with the old traditional way, the one with the lamb manure. So his name is Gylfi, and he's married to my cousin. And they live in Mývatn, which is in the north part of Iceland. Actually, not so far away from where I actually come. And I pretty much told you all about that technique, about that smoking. But it's a good story as well, because he actually smokes his fish like this, so it still has like a lot of skin and a lot of bones on it. He will then, after smoking, he will cut off the bones and all that stuff, and he actually put it in barrels. Keep the barrels outside, pretty much fermenting until the beginning of or until the winter, and then he actually gets the sheep into the houses, and he actually feed it to the sheep. So it's like this really nice circles because then they do their thing on the floor, and he uses it to smoke it.
And these are the geothermal bread ovens that you tasted the geothermal bread today, and talk a little bit about that and that tradition. Yeah,
that's like especially like in Mývatn, it's a big tradition, and each family usually have their own hole, so it's like they
inherit through the generations.
So they just continue using it, and it's actually quite interesting. Like you would think that they would have to dig quite deep, but it's not deep at all. It's just like this, and the heat is there.
They put their batter in a bucket or sometimes a milk container, and they leave it for 24 hours. And
actually, cooks. Yeah, and usually it's baked in those used milk containers for some reason.
And there it is. They sometimes call it geyser bread.
Yeah.
And then this is a lamb farmer that we met and tell her story, his story.
Yeah, so it's I actually used to work like on a farm back in the days for his grandmother and grandfather. So he actually, after that his father and mother stopped being farmers, he took over their farm. And that farm is called Möðrudalur, and it's on the there is no farm in Iceland that is on a higher level than their farm is, and it's really impressive to come there and meet them and especially like see their sheep actually, because it's so high up and there's so little grass. So those sheep, they really have to. Obviously, a lot of grass there, but but it's very sandy.
That's a turf house. So.
It's very sandy, so the sheep, they really have to work hard to find the right spots, and they do a lot of climbing, and they are massive. They are really in a good shape.
And this is a barley farmer in the east. He has a farm called Valines, and just quickly, and then Iceland had prohibition on beer until I think the 1990s, and so they kind of lost their barley tradition because they weren't using it for beer any longer. And he is really an incredible person. I feel maybe single-handedly returned the tradition of using barley to the Icelandic people.
Yeah, I think he's like one of very few that actually grows barley, and it seems to go very well for him. Yeah. He as well makes a whole lot of fantastic vegetables that are organic and nice. Yeah, this is his farm.
And he started this farm in an area where there were no trees. And he said the elevation is pretty high, and he said there was criticism of him in the beginning because they said there's not enough oxygen there to grow your barley. And he said, you know what, I'm going to create my own oxygen. And he started his farm 25 years ago, and he's planted over 1 million birch trees on his property. And he really has created his own forest and his own ecosystem. He's incredibly inspiring. He has a company now called Motorjord that sells his barley and other products, and you see it everywhere in Iceland now. And again, when I started traveling in Iceland, couldn't find it anywhere. And it's encouraging to see now that there's an interest in Iceland for these products.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah. And
I think it's like in the when the crisis actually hit us, there was like, which was obviously not really good, but there came a lot of good things out of it though. There seemed to be like a lot of people that actually, like, obviously lost their jobs, and they would like start thinking, okay, it's like now I have to do something else, and there was no job to get, so they pretty much had to find out something new, something that they would like to do, something that they obviously knew. So they opened up like a whole lot of new companies doing really interesting things.
And I think as well, we've talked about how with the economic crisis, beforehand, everyone was importing everything. And so they have this incredible lamb and amazing smoked lamb, but they were importing prosciutto and eating that instead. I mean, I think that's a really good example. And after the crisis, they could no longer afford to do that. And so they started to appreciate their smoked lamb, their other products that were right around them at their feet. And that's certainly a silver lining. I mean, you endured so much, but...
yeah, definitely.
Can we talk a little bit about the dairy in Iceland? Icelanders consume more dairy, I think, than any other population in the world.
I'm pretty sure.
Talk a little bit about skyr. Maybe with that.
Yeah, I think with the dairies, it's kind of... I mean, there's not so much to say about them, I guess. It's they're really good. But it's still the biggest tradition probably is an Icelandic milk product called skyr. It's somewhere between a yogurt and a cheese actually, and it's actually like originally it's made with live bacteria. So the farmers, they would usually just skim their milk, so take all the cream away, and they took the fat-free milk out, and even the story says that. Then when they were like moving or starting a farm somewhere, they would like split it in a couple of jars, take one down to the river and another one to the sea and one up to the mountain and something, so they could find out where they could find the best starter. So they would have like some live bacteria that would sit down in the milk and actually make it what do you call it? Curdle, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And then they would they get this product called skyr, and then the other one called whey, and that's like skyr is, it's like everybody in Iceland eats it at least once a day, I think.
Absolutely,
it's crazy,
and it's amazing. This is a birch forager and producer that we met, and if you tasted Gunnar's his schnapps and liqueur, this is the forest that it came from, and the birch twig inside is from this forest. And I think she's in the East as well. And she also produces birch syrup, which again, I think was a tradition that you used to have in Iceland, and it would decreased a little bit. And she now sells her birch syrup throughout Iceland, and it seems to be something that Icelanders are appreciating.
Oh yeah, definitely. And she makes a lot of spice blends and salts and etc. All just like using the birch tree actually.
And there's one of his sous chefs with his birch tattoo. That's how important it is. This is the salt maker from Saltwerk, the geothermal salt company that we covered. And I think that story is very interesting. Tell a little bit more about how that started.
Well, it started in Denmark. So there were like two friends that went to Denmark to study to be engineers. For some reason, because I can't remember, they started reading some books, like old books, and then they found out that the Danish king actually he had people making salt in Iceland for him back in the days. So they started to like take a look into that, and actually ended up opening up their own salt company,
and they're doing really well.
Yeah, which goes really well actually.
And that again, when we started, you really couldn't find their salt anywhere, and now it's everywhere. Every restaurant table that I saw last month seemed to have Saltwerk on the table. It's
the thing as well, it's like for Iceland, and in Iceland, it's like at the end of the day, it's like we're only like 320,000 people. So it's like if you will come up with a product that is actually really good, it's actually kind of easy to like, what do you call it, like. Get it to the market, actually. People will talk about it, and they are like one restaurant to another, or like one house mother to another. People will talk, and it will go really fast. But at the same time, it's like if you come up with something horrible, it's never going to work.
Because everyone's going to talk about that. And this is hardfisker that she tried today. And these are some. So again, what we've seen. What I think is inspiring as well in Iceland is they really try, I think, to use all their products. So these are drying racks they use only the fillets of the wolffish for the hardfisker, but they then dry the heads and the bones, and they send them to parts of Africa where they're used in stews.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, it's like a lot of those companies, and especially the companies in fish, they will try to use every single thing that every single part of the fish, and it's the same as like with the restaurant. It's like something that we focus really hard on is to get, like we want to get like whole pieces of whatever we are buying, and we want to use every single part of it, and the same with. Or even like if we are not going to buy like whole things, we will buy some strings part that nobody else is using. As well, it's like with everything, like with vegetables, for an example, it's like we try to use like if it comes with roots and it comes with the leaves, it's like we will use it all. And it's like unfortunately, it's like so many farmers and just people in general, they don't know what, like they will get I don't know, a celeriac or something, and they will get it, so they have already cut the roots and the leaves off. Which is a shame because it's really good as well. So we try to like talk about those things and get people to bring us the whole thing, so we can just use it. We even have our farmers bringing us the wheat that grows around the vegetables, because we will use that for salad as well. Everything from like the peel from the onions, we will put in on a hot place somewhere until it's dry, and then we'll use it to smoke with. So it's just like really, it's like we try to question every single piece that goes into the truss and ask, what can I do with it?
I think this is the blue mussel producer that Gunnar works with, and he has told this story about how when Gunnar started placing his mussel orders, they were the only orders coming in, and he would go out to sea to collect sometimes 2 kilos for you, and that was it. And now he really is having a hard time, I think, keeping up with business and the demand.
Yeah, I think it's going really. Yeah. I think it's going good.
But I think it certainly speaks to you just really putting that on the table at Dill. And and allowing people to experience it and then to want it everywhere they go in Iceland. And
yeah, exactly. And it's for me, it's like it's really fun to keep this good connection to those guys, and being able to know what is behind it and what they have like been doing or even sacrificing to bring those products to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is our seabird egg collector.
Yeah, so this is out in Grímsey. So it's actually the northwest part of Iceland. So it's a 3-hour trip on a ship.
It's a island.
Yeah, it's a very,
on the
very
Arctic
small
Circle.
island.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Arctic Circle is actually it goes through it literally. And my friend Siggi, he actually goes in a rope down those cliffs to collect those eggs.
Pictures of him. It's really intense, and they're not attached to, like in contemporary climbing, you attach yourselves to the ground, but they were just his rope was wrapped around a tractor hitch that Gunnar was holding, and that was it. And we asked him if there are ever accidents, and he said, yeah, all the time. But he continues to do his work, and it's inspiring but a little disconcerting too, what he's doing to collect those eggs. But I think certainly, again, speaks to the perseverance and the determination to keep tradition alive amongst some people.
And it's even funny, it's like he would go and collect them, and then he just has a lot. And the other people from the island, they will know that he went yesterday, and then they will come and get a couple of eggs.
They have kind of a collecting area, right? A cooler where there's 86 people on the island, so it's a small, tight-knit community.
It's a very, very small community.
The eggs are shaped like cones because the birds don't build nests, and so they just have evolved into cones so they don't roll off the side of the cliff. Very practical. And we had some fantastic hard-boiled seabird eggs that night. And this is Siggi is also a fisherman, and so we went out with him about 40 kilometers into the ocean and fished, and he as well talked about the challenges with the fishing quotas now in the government. It can be, it's a struggle, and he's actually gone north. His family is not from the island. They used to fish in the southern parts, but because the fish are moving further north, because probably from global warming, he's had to move north to kind of follow the fish. But he's on the top of the world now, so you have to wonder what he's going to do next.
He's not going in north.
And these are this is some of the goat sausage from the goat farmer that we mentioned before, and those are her Icelandic goats. There's Gunnar. We spent a lot of time with those goats one day.
Yeah, they were pretty neat.
There's Johanna. And these are the lava fields on the way to the Karl producer. He's the shark maker. And there's his putrefied shark. He eats a shark.
Tastes like cheese.
It supposedly tastes like a really strong Stilton. I don't know. I've had it a few times, and I can never discover that flavor. But he eats a shark sandwich every day, this producer. And he swears by it, and he's 80, and his skin is fantastic. I think there's something to the shark oil, and he's so enthusiastic about his work. And there's the shark fermenting.
Yeah, they actually start with like fermenting the sharks in those barrels under like a pressure before they actually then hang them up to dry.
Yeah. Here's some pictures from our photo shoots. It was really challenging to shoot outside, so we didn't do all of our shoots inside with Icelandic weather.
So if you're doing a book and the photographer says that he wants to use the natural light because it's so beautiful, don't listen to him.
Just say no. In a rainstorm, all his mise en place strewn across the stones. It was a challenge. And there's Gunnar's, I love this picture, your daughter. Who's kind of contemplating one of your dishes.
Checking it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And these, we even, for the book, Gunnar's friend August took us out in his prop plane, and we did some aerial shots. I was sitting in the back. It was a little nerve-wracking every time he would open up the window, and they would shoot, and then he would tip to the side, outside, right over the volcano that had exploded in 2011, or over a glacier, but we did what we had to do to get the shot.
You came back.
But it was really fascinating to see Iceland after all these years from the air and see how it all fit together. And so I just have a picture here of coffee that I think it really speaks to kind of where Iceland is at now and how it's evolved since the crisis. This is a friend of Gunnar's who runs this company. And I think it just, the care that's going into his product, I think speaks to a lot of the care and diligence that a lot of people have now to creating like artisanal beers and products that really are of high quality and using coffee isn't an Icelandic ingredient, but in terms of just focusing on of making it the best. And
yeah, actually, if you're importing it, then you should import something good, right?
Absolutely. To talk a little bit about the serviceware in the book, everything was sourced from Icelandic potters, and we even had some of the serviceware brought from the National Art Museum that he was shooting on, and then we had to run it back to the museum that night because they were not happy to have there. But even some of the pelts that are used in the background, we had a seal pelt and reindeer hides, and it's very inspiring.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's all like right now, everything at the restaurant. So those pictures are actually
these are my photos that I took at a dinner.
But they are from our ex-location. So we just moved like 4 months ago, and like if I was moving anyway, we decided to take like the whole thing even further. Make it even more like Icelandic. So now it's everything in the restaurant, like the chairs, the tables, every plate and all the stuff. Everything is like handcrafted in Iceland. We have some lamb leather on the chairs, and it's really pretty, and it's very Icelandic, and I'm very
much
happy.
You, I think.
Definitely.
So there's our photographer and Gunnar on the road. But does anybody have any questions?
You've obviously done a really great job of telling the story of the producers and the origins of the ingredients and everything. Is that a responsibility that more chefs should do? Is it something that needs to be done in more restaurants? And if so, how best to do it to a dining crowd that's here to eat their meal and then they leave to do something else? How do you balance the story that you've told in the book with the guests in the restaurant?
Yeah, I definitely think that those stories should be told more. But obviously, I mean, I really don't know like how the situation is somewhere else. But I just felt really like in Iceland, and especially at this time, that those stories should come out, and I really just wanted to embrace those things that they were doing, because I was really impressed with their stuff.
Thank you for coming today.